The woman came back with the sunrise, and the first thing she brought was not a weapon, but a memory Elias Whitaker had spent 17 years trying to bury. He was standing at the front fence of his ranch, one boot in the dust, one hand on a crooked board that read "Ranch for Sale," when the morning went quiet in a way only the West can go quiet, as if every bird, every horse, every blade of dry grass had decided to hold its breath. The hammer in his hand felt heavier than iron. The sign swung once in the pale light, groaning on a single nail. Mercy Bend sat 4 miles east, just beyond the low brown hills, but out here there was nothing except open range, sunburned grass, and a tired white rancher with more debts than cattle. Then came the sound. Hooves. Not many at first. Just one horse climbing slow over the ridge. Elias lifted his eyes. A rider appeared against the gold edge of dawn, wrapped in a blue blanket, sitting straight in the saddle like someone who had crossed more than miles to reach him. Apache. He knew it before he saw her face. The way she rode told him enough. No wasted motion. No fear. No apology. She guided her horse down the slope and stopped 10 feet from his gate. Dust curled around the animal's legs. The woman looked to be near 30, with dark hair braided over one shoulder, brown eyes steady as winter water, and a calmness that made the old ranch feel smaller around her. Elias did not reach for the rifle leaning beside the fence post. Something in him knew better. Something older than sense. She stepped down, her boots touching the dirt without a sound, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The wind moved the edge of her blanket. A hawk circled high above the pasture. The woman reached beneath the folds of blue wool and drew out a narrow strip of deer hide, cracked with age, tied around a small turquoise bead that had been split down one side. She laid it on the fence rail between them. Elias stared at it. His fingers loosened. The hammer slipped from his hand and struck the dirt with a soft thud. The woman's voice came low, careful, almost gentle. "Remember me, cowboy?" The words went through him like cold creek water. He looked from the bracelet to her face, searching for an answer his mind refused to give. He knew that bead. He knew the burn mark along the edge of the leather. He knew the knot, because he had tied it himself with shaking hands in a storm long ago. But the girl he remembered had been small, frightened, wrapped in a torn flour sack and trembling in the corner of his barn while rain beat holes in the roof. This woman was not trembling. This woman had returned standing tall in the morning light, carrying the past like it belonged to her. Elias swallowed, but no words came. Then his old bay horse, tethered near the trough, lifted its head and gave a sharp, uneasy cry. The woman did not turn. She only watched Elias, waiting. Behind her, along the ridge where the sun had just broken open, more riders appeared. 5, 10, 20, then more, spreading across the hill in a silent line. Apache horsemen, their faces unreadable, their hands empty, their horses still. Elias felt the whole world narrow to that strip of deer hide lying on his fence. From the road to Mercy Bend, a wagon bell started ringing fast, carried by the wind. Someone in town had seen them. Someone would come. Men always came when fear gave them an excuse. Elias finally found his voice, rough from years of dust and silence. "Ma'am," he said, "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The Apache woman's eyes softened, but only for a breath. "No," she said. "I crossed 17 winters to find the man who saved my life." The riders on the ridge did not move, and somehow that made them more frightening to the people of Mercy Bend than any charge across open ground could have been. By the time the wagon bell quit ringing, doors were opening in town, windows were lifting, and men who had not worked an honest fence line in years were stepping into the street with fear dressed up as courage. Elias could not see all that from his ranch, but he knew the sound of Mercy Bend waking angry. He had heard it before. The Apache woman heard it too. Her eyes shifted once toward the east road, where dust had begun to rise in a thin brown ribbon. "They are coming," she said. Elias looked at the silent horsemen above his pasture. "Seems to me they already came." Her mouth almost moved into a smile, but the sorrow in her face stopped it. "Not them." The first riders from town appeared less than a minute later, 6 men pushing hard through the morning dust, with Sheriff Amos Creed in front and Silas Voss riding just behind him on a gray mare too fine for a man with such a mean heart. Amos Creed wore his badge high and his courage low. He was a narrow man with a clean hat, soft hands, and eyes that always looked for the strongest side of any argument before choosing where to stand. Silas Voss was different. He did not look for the strongest side. He bought it. He owned the feed store, half the wells, 2 judges, and the paper note hanging over Elias Whitaker's ranch like a storm cloud that never broke. Silas slowed his horse when he saw the Apache line on the ridge, but only for a breath. Then his face arranged itself into the smile of a man who had found a new rope for an old trap. "Well now," Silas called, loud enough for every frightened soul behind him to hear. "I wondered what kind of trouble you were hiding out here, Whitaker." Elias said nothing. He bent slowly, picked up the hammer, and set it on the fence rail beside the old bracelet. The Apache woman watched that small movement as if it mattered more than all the riders on both sides. Sheriff Creed stopped 20 feet from the gate. His horse tossed its head, uneasy at the scent of so many strangers and so much held breath. "Elias," the sheriff said, "you had best tell me why there are Apache riders gathered on your land." "My land for another few hours," Silas added, "unless he finally found a way to pay what he owes." A murmur moved through the townsmen. Debt was something they understood. Apache riders, they did not. Elias looked at the sheriff, then at Silas, then at the woman standing beside his gate with the blue blanket shifting in the wind. "I do not rightly know why she is here," he said, "but she has not threatened me." Silas laughed under his breath. "They never have to threaten. Their kind just appear, and decent folks are supposed to tremble." The woman turned her head slowly toward him. She did not answer the insult. That silence bothered Silas more than words would have. He leaned in his saddle, pointing one gloved finger at the bracelet. "What is that?" Elias did not touch it. The strip of deer hide lay there between past and present, small enough to fit in a child's palm, heavy enough to bend a man's whole life around it. "A thing I have not seen in a long time," Elias said. Sheriff Creed narrowed his eyes. "You know her, then?" The woman answered before Elias could. He knew a child. The sheriff looked at her as if her English itself offended him. "I was asking him, and I was answering the truth," she said. The road behind the sheriff filled with more townspeople now, wagons, horses, men in work shirts, women holding children close, all of them staring toward the ridge as if the devil had learned to ride quiet. No one crossed the gate. No one came close enough to see the woman's hands were empty. That was the way fear worked in Mercy Bend. It stood far away and called itself wisdom. Elias felt the old shame crawl up his back, not shame for helping her, though he still did not fully remember her face, but shame for the town that had never needed proof before passing judgment. Silas saw that shame and mistook it for weakness. "Sheriff," he said, "I want this noted. If Whitaker has been sheltering enemies, that changes the matter of his debt. A man disloyal to this territory has no business holding 160 acres of good grazing land." At that, the Apache riders on the ridge shifted together, not forward, not threatening, just one quiet ripple through horses and men. The townspeople stiffened. Sheriff Creed raised one hand, though no one had moved against him. Elias stepped between the gate and the road. He did not mean to. His boots simply carried him there. The woman looked at his back, and something deep in her gaze changed. Recognition, maybe, or grief. Silas noticed it too, and his smile thinned. "Careful, Whitaker," he said. "Folks will start thinking you chose a side." Elias looked down at the bracelet again. The cracked turquoise bead caught the sun. For one sharp second, he smelled rain on hot wood, heard a frightened child whispering through the dark, and saw his younger hands tying that knot while thunder shook the barn roof. His chest tightened. The memory was there now, close as breath, but not whole. Not yet. The Apache woman stepped nearer to the fence. "Let them think," she said softly. "They were wrong the first time, too. The bracelet should have been ashes." That was the thought that struck Elias first, clean and terrible, as the cracked turquoise bead caught the morning sun on his fence rail. He had tied that knot in a storm, inside a barn that burned before winter came. He had watched the roof fall in weeks later after lightning found the dry hay. And for 17 years he had believed every small thing from that night had vanished with the smoke. Yet there it was. Deer hide. Turquoise. A blackened edge no wider than a fingernail. Proof that Mercy had a longer memory than men. Sheriff Creed shifted in his saddle. "Whitaker," he said, trying to sound firm in front of the crowd. "Answer me plain. Did you help this woman before?" Elias did not look at him. His eyes stayed on the bracelet. "Not this woman," he said. "A girl." The Apache woman's face did not change, but her fingers closed once around the edge of her blue blanket. Elias saw it. A small thing. A human thing. And the memory opened wider. Rain hammered the roof of the old Barrow barn, 17 years ago, hard enough to drown out the cattle lowing in the pens. Elias had been 26 then, leaner, quicker, still foolish enough to believe a man could work hard and be left alone. He had gone out after midnight to check on a sick mare when he heard something behind the feed sacks. Not a rat. Not wind. Breathing. Small, broken, scared. He lifted the lantern, and there she was, a child no taller than the grain barrel, soaked through, shivering, one wrist wrapped in a torn piece of cloth darkened by mud and rain. Apache. That was the first thing his mind told him, because that was how Mercy Bend had trained every white man to see. Not child. Not lost. Not hurt. Apache. Then she looked up at him, and the training failed. Her eyes were too young to carry that much fear. Elias remembered setting the lantern down slow, palms open. "Easy now," he had whispered. "I am not here to harm you." She had not understood every word, but she understood his voice. Outside, men were shouting near the creek road, their calls blurred by thunder and distance. Elias did not know what had happened before she reached the barn, and he did not ask. Some truths are too heavy for a child to lift twice. He only saw her wrist, the cold in her lips, the way she kept looking toward the door as if the whole world might come through it. So he tore a clean strip from an old deer hide strap hanging by the tack wall, threaded a turquoise bead from his own saddle charm through the knot, and tied it gently around her wrist to hold the cloth in place. "There," he said, though his hands shook worse than hers. "That will do until we find your people." Back at the fence, in the present morning, Silas Voss made a small sound of disgust. "A touching little tale, if any of it is true." Elias turned his head just enough to see him. "I did not tell it for you." The words landed quiet, but the crowd felt them. Even Sheriff Creed looked away first. The Apache woman stepped closer to the rail, close enough now that Elias could see a faint pale line across her wrist beneath the bracelet. Not ugly, not shameful, just a mark where one life had crossed another and stayed. "You gave me that bead," she said. "You said blue stone was good against fear." Elias breathed out slowly. "I said that. You said many things you thought I could not understand." A softness passed through her voice, then disappeared. "You told me to stay behind the hay bales. You told me not to cry when men came asking questions. You told them you had seen no child." The townspeople murmured. Silas stiffened because the story was turning dangerous in the one way he could not easily buy or bury. It was becoming specific. Elias remembered the lantern swinging from a nail. He remembered boots outside the barn door. He remembered lying for the first time in his life and feeling no guilt at all. One man had asked if he had seen an Apache girl pass through. Elias had looked him dead in the eye and said no, while the child held her breath 6 feet away behind stacked hay. Then came the part he had buried deepest. Dawn. Mud. The creek swollen wide. Black water running brown and fast between cottonwoods. Elias carrying the girl wrapped in his coat, leading his horse on foot because hoofbeats would carry too far. The child had clutched the bracelet against her chest as if it were a promise. On the far bank, smoke rose from Apache campfires miles west. Thin gray lines beneath the storm-cleared sky. He had pointed toward them. "Run when I tell you," he had said. "Do not look back." She had looked back anyway. Children always do. In the present, Elias touched the fence rail, but not the bracelet. His voice came out lower than before. "I thought you made it home." The woman held his gaze. "I did." Then she looked toward Mercy Bend, toward the sheriff, toward Silas, toward every face that had come ready to judge what it had never cared to know. "But you did not." The words stayed in the air longer than thunder. "But you did not." Elias felt them settle across his shoulders with the weight of all the years he had refused to count. The crowd outside his ranch went still, not because they understood, but because some truths have a sound even the guilty can hear. Silas Voss sat straighter in his saddle. Sheriff Creed looked from Elias to the Apache woman, waiting for someone else to decide whether memory could stand as evidence. Elias did not give him that comfort. He looked past them, past the road, past the town rising dusty and narrow in the distance, and saw the years after that storm return one by one. He had gotten the child across Blackwater Creek before sunrise. He had watched her run west through the wet grass, small feet splashing through mud, his old coat dragging behind her like a blanket made for a giant. Then he had turned back toward Mercy Bend and walked home alone. By noon, the story had already been changed. Men said he had lied. Men said he had chosen Apache blood over his own kind. The Barrow Ranch foreman handed him his wages in a flour sack and told him there was no work for a man who could not keep his loyalties straight. At the livery, no one would sell him feed on credit. At the church steps, women moved their children aside as if kindness could spread like fever. Elias had said nothing. That was his mistake, maybe, or his strength. Out here, the two often wore the same face. He bought this little piece of land with every dollar he had left, 160 acres of poor grass and stubborn mesquite, and built his ranch where the town could see him failing from a safe distance. Year by year, Mercy Bend forgot the child. It remembered only the accusation. That was easier. That let them sleep. The Apache woman listened as if she could hear those years without Elias speaking them aloud. Then she reached for the bracelet on the rail and lifted it with both hands. "My name is Naomi Redfeather," she said. The name moved through the crowd in whispers, uncertain, uncomfortable, alive. "My father was Taza Redfeather. My mother called me Little Rain because I came into the world during a summer storm." Elias closed his eyes for half a breath. Little Rain. He remembered that. Not from her mouth, but from the way she had pointed at herself that morning near the creek, tapping her chest, whispering two words he had not known how to hold. Naomi. Little Rain. He opened his eyes again, and she was no longer a ghost from a barn, no longer a child wrapped in his coat. She was a woman standing in front of him with 17 winters behind her and no tremble in her voice. "I did not come here because I forgot what happened," Naomi said. "I came because I remembered all of it." Silas gave a sharp laugh, trying to break the spell before it took root. "Memory does not pay bank notes." Naomi turned toward him, slow as shade moving across a porch. "No," she said, "but honor pays debts men like you never understood." A few riders on the ridge lowered their eyes, not in fear, but in respect. Elias saw it and felt his throat tighten. Respect had become such a rare thing in his life that he almost did not recognize it when it stood before him in daylight. Sheriff Creed cleared his throat. "Miss Redfeather, if you have business here, state it plain. These people are unsettled." Naomi looked at the townspeople gathered behind him. "They were unsettled before I arrived. I only gave their fear a shape." No one answered. Even the horses seemed quieter. Then Naomi stepped through the open gate. The movement was simple, but the crowd reacted as if a line had been crossed that had lived in their minds longer than the fence had stood in the dirt. Elias did not stop her. She walked to him and held out the bracelet. "My father kept this until he died. He said the white cowboy who tied it saved not only his daughter, but the honor of every man who had forgotten what a child was worth." Elias stared at the worn leather in her palms. "I was just trying to get you home. And it cost you yours," she said. That cut deeper than blame. Elias looked toward the ranch house, with its leaning porch, patched roof, and one window that never shut right in winter. Home. He had called it that because a man needs a word for the place where he sleeps, even when no one waits inside it. Naomi followed his gaze. "That is why I came back," she said. Silas leaned forward, his voice hardening. "For what? To thank him with a pretty speech?" Naomi turned back to Elias, and for the first time, the calm in her face broke enough to show the fire beneath it. "No," she said. "I came to finish a promise made before I was old enough to understand it." Elias felt the mourning tilt around him. "What promise?" Naomi held the bracelet between them. "To stand beside the man who stood alone for me." The promise sounded simple until the town heard what it meant. Naomi stood inside Elias Whitaker's gate with the old bracelet in her hands, the morning sun touching the turquoise bead like a coal that had learned to burn blue. Elias looked at her, then at the Apache riders on the ridge, then at the people of Mercy Bend gathered on the road with their mouths shut and their eyes wide. He had spent 17 years being the kind of man no one asked questions about, because questions might lead to answers, and answers might require an apology. Now the answer had come on horseback. Silas Voss leaned forward in his saddle, his smile gone thin and pale. "Stand beside him how?" he asked. "With threats? With riders? With some old story no court in this county will care to hear." Naomi did not look away from Elias. With marriage, she said. The word moved across the yard slower than smoke. A woman near the wagon covered her mouth. One of the townsmen gave a short, nervous laugh, then stopped when nobody joined him. Sheriff Creed blinked as if he had heard wrong. Elias did not move at all. For a moment, he looked carved from the same weathered pine as his fence posts. Then his eyes dropped to the bracelet, and something like sorrow crossed his face. Naomi, he said carefully, tasting her name for the first time as a grown woman's name, not a child's whisper in the rain. You do not owe me that. Her gaze softened, but her voice stayed steady. I know what I owe. No, Elias said, quieter now. You know what happened. That is not the same. The Apache riders remained still on the hill, but Elias felt their attention turn sharper. Not angry, listening, measuring him. A lesser man might have smiled at such an offer. A desperate man might have taken it before shame could catch him. Elias was both lesser and desperate on some days, but not that morning. Not with the whole town watching to see if he would turn a rescued child into a debt he could collect. I saved you because you needed saving, he said. Not because I expected your life in return. Naomi's fingers closed around the bracelet. My life is mine to give, and mine is too poor a place to put it. That struck her. He saw it in the small stillness around her mouth. The wind moved, dust between them. Far off, a loose shutter knocked against the ranch house wall, slow and hollow. Naomi turned then, not fully toward the crowd, but enough that her words could carry. You hear him? She asked. This is why I came. Silas frowned. Because he refused you? Because he still thinks honor means losing everything quietly. No one spoke. Even Sheriff Creed seemed unable to find a law against a sentence like that. Naomi faced Elias again. When my father found me, I told him about the white cowboy who lied to cruel men, crossed a flooded creek, and sent me home with a blue stone against fear. My father wanted to come that day. Elias looked up. Then why did he not? Because I begged him not to. Her voice lowered. I knew if Apache riders came for you then, this town would not ask why. They would only decide you had betrayed them twice. Elias felt the truth of it settle cold in his stomach. 17 years ago, a rescue had been enough to ruin him. A visit from her people might have buried him under a name he could never escape. Naomi looked toward the ridge. So my father waited. He watched. He learned what was done to you. Every season, he sent someone near Mercy Bend. Every season, they brought back the same story. Elias Whitaker still alone. Elias Whitaker still poor. Elias Whitaker still refusing to speak ill of the town that shamed him. Silas shifted in his saddle, irritated now, because the crowd had begun listening differently. Not with fear, with memory. Some of them had been there 17 years ago. Some had closed doors. Some had looked away. Naomi took one step closer to Elias. Before my father died, he told me a debt of honor cannot be paid by hiding behind gratitude. It must walk into daylight. She lifted the bracelet. He said when I became a woman, I must choose how to pay it. Elias's voice was rough. And you chose marriage? I chose you, Naomi said. Marriage is only the word both our peoples understand poorly. The line reached him deeper than he expected. Around them, Mercy Bend stood in the dust, trapped between gossip and grace. Silas suddenly laughed, loud enough to tear the moment open. Well, that is sweet enough for a church picnic, but it changes nothing. At noon, this ranch is mine. Naomi turned to him at last. No, she said. That is the second reason I came. From the ridge, one Apache rider started down the slope carrying a leather folder tied with red cord. Silas watched it come, and for the first time that morning, fear found his face before anger could cover it. The rider came down the slope slowly, as if speed would cheapen what he carried. He was an older Apache man with silver threaded through his braids and a face cut by sun, wind, and years of saying little. The leather folder rested across both palms. Not hidden, not brandished, offered. Every eye in the yard followed him, and every hoof step seemed to press Silas Voss smaller into his saddle. Elias knew that kind of silence. It came before storms, before verdicts, before a man learned the ground beneath him was not as solid as he had believed. The rider stopped beside Naomi and bowed his head once. She accepted the folder, then turned toward Sheriff Creed. You wear the badge, she said. So read it aloud. The sheriff looked at Silas first, by habit more than choice. That was the trouble with weak men. Even when truth stood in front of them, they checked with power before touching it. Silas forced a laugh. No need for theatrics, Sheriff. I hold Whitaker's note. Signed proper. Filed proper. Due at noon. Naomi untied the red cord. Then noon has arrived early. She opened the folder and drew out 3 sheets, each creased from travel, but kept clean as church linen. The top page bore county stamps, a judge's seal, and handwriting Elias recognized from old courthouse notices. Sheriff Creed took it reluctantly. His eyes moved across the first line, then stopped. The color left his cheeks in a slow, honest way. Silas saw it. Read, Naomi said. Creed swallowed. His voice came rough at first. Transfer of debt obligation from Silas Voss Holdings to Naomi Redfeather, witnessed and recorded by Judge Alton Meade, territory of New Mexico. A murmur went through the crowd. Silas spurred his horse 1 step forward. That is impossible. Naomi did not blink. Many things are impossible until a rich man forgets to count who is watching. The sheriff kept reading, slower now. All outstanding claims against the property of Elias Whitaker, 160 acres, house, barn, well, grazing rights, and future improvements, paid in full by the purchasing party. The paper trembled in his hands. Elias stared at him. Paid in full. The words should have lifted him, but they struck him first like grief. How many winters had he spent choosing between feed and flour while his debt had already been answered somewhere beyond the town line? How many times had Silas ridden out with a polite smile, pretending mercy was running thin? Elias looked at Silas, and the man would not meet his eyes. Naomi handed the sheriff the second page. That one too. Creed hesitated, then read. Upon the death of Naomi Redfeather, all rights of protection, settlement, and release passed to his daughter, Naomi Redfeather, to be exercised at her discretion. A woman in the crowd whispered Naomi's name as if saying it correctly for the first time. The sound reached her. She did not turn toward it, but Elias saw her shoulders ease by the smallest measure. Silas recovered enough anger to cover fear. Apache paper does not decide white land. Naomi pointed to the seal. The judge was white. The clerk was white. The debt was yours. The money was my father's. Tell me which part frightens you most. No gunshot could have quieted the road better. Silas's jaw worked, but nothing useful came out. Sheriff Creed folded the pages with hands that had lost their certainty. Mr. Voss, he said, and for once the title sounded thin. If these records are true, you have had no lawful claim on this ranch for 12 years. 12 years. Elias felt the number move through him. 12 years of notices nailed to his door. 12 years of town pity sharpened into mockery. 12 years of Silas letting him bend under a burden already gone, because a bowed man was easier to buy than a free one. Naomi stepped closer to Elias, not close enough to crowd him, just close enough that the blue blanket brushed the dust near his boot. My father wanted to give this to you sooner, she said. I asked him to wait. Elias looked at her, wounded by that more than the debt. Why? Because if he saved your land while I was still a child, the town would say you had been paid for helping me. They would make your mercy look like trade. Her voice lowered. I wanted to come when I could stand here myself and say the truth. The wind shifted. The ranch for sale sign creaked on its nail behind Elias. Naomi reached up, pulled it free, and laid it face down in the dirt. This land is not for sale, she said. Silas turned red beneath his hat brim. You think? This ends here. Naomi looked toward the hay barn, where 2 of Silas's hired men had drifted too far from the others, pretending to study the fence line. Elias noticed them then. So did the old Apache rider. So did every horse on the ridge. Naomi's voice stayed calm, but the morning tightened around it. No, she said. Men like you always need one more mistake before God and witnesses are satisfied. Silas Voss had the face of a man watching a door close on a room he thought he owned. For years, he had carried Mercy Bend in his pocket with his bank notes, his favors, his quiet threats, and that clean gray mare that stepped through town like the streets belonged to her. But standing before Elias Whitaker's fence, with his false claim folded in Sheriff Creed's nervous hands, Silas found something money could not buy back. Witnesses. Too many of them. Townspeople lined the road, no longer whispering with the same sharp teeth. Some looked at Elias now as if seeing the man beneath the rumors for the first time. Some looked at the ground because the ground was kinder than Naomi Redfeather's silence. Elias stood beside the fallen ranch for sale sign, feeling the morning sun warm the back of his neck, feeling nothing like victory yet. Victory was too loud a word for what had happened. This felt more like waking up after a long illness and realizing the fever had not been weather, but poison. Sheriff Creed cleared his throat. "Mr. Voss," he said, "until these documents are reviewed at the courthouse, I cannot allow any action against this property." Silas turned on him so quickly the sheriff's horse sidestepped. "Cannot allow?" He laughed once, but it came out dry. "You remember who helped put that badge on your chest, Amos?" The sheriff's mouth tightened. Every person on that road heard it. Every person understood it. A badge, bought and worn, did not shine the same way in daylight. Naomi looked at Creed, not cruelly, not kindly, just directly. "A man can be handed a badge," she said, "but he must decide each morning whether to deserve it." Creed looked down at the silver star pinned to his vest. For a moment, he seemed smaller, then older, then almost human. Silas saw the shift and hated it. His eyes flicked toward the hay barn, where his two hired men had gone still near the stacked feed and dry grass. It was a tiny glance. Most would have missed it. Naomi did not. Elias did not either. Years alone had taught him that danger often moved first in the eyes. The old Apache rider, the one with silver in his braids, spoke a few quiet words in his own language. The riders on the ridge did not draw weapons. They did not shout. They simply began to descend, one by one, slow and spaced apart, like a shadow lengthening across the slope. The townspeople stepped back from the road, fear rising again, hungry for an old shape to wear. Silas seized it. "You see," he shouted. "You see what she brought here? This was never about honor. It was a show of force." Naomi raised one hand. Every Apache rider stopped. The sudden stillness made Silas's words look foolish hanging alone in the air. "Force is what you expected," Naomi said, "because it is what you would have used." Elias turned toward her. There was no anger in her voice. That made it stronger. Silas's hired men tried to drift away from the barn, but Sheriff Creed saw them now. So did half the town. One man held a small tin of lamp oil. The other had a match safe in his hand, closed and used, but enough. The crowd saw it together, and the story Silas had been building all morning broke in their faces. No flame had touched the hay. No harm had been done. But intention stood there plainly, dressed in work boots and gilt. Creed swung down from his horse. His legs looked uncertain when they met the dirt, but they held. "Set those down," he said. The hired men looked to Silas. That was their mistake. Everyone saw that too. Silas's face hardened. "You fools," he muttered. It was not loud, but the wind carried it. The sheriff heard it. Elias heard it. Naomi heard it. The whole road heard the sound of a powerful man abandoning the hands he had sent. Creed walked to the men, took the oil and match safe, and handed them to the nearest townsman. Then he turned back to Silas, and for the first time that morning, his badge looked like it. "Might weigh something real." "Mr. Voss," he said slowly, "you will ride into town with me." Silas stared at him. "You do not have the spine." Creed's jaw moved once. Maybe not yesterday. The silence that followed was deep enough to bury 17 years. Elias looked toward the ridge. The Apache riders remained mounted and calm, not conquerors, not invaders, just witnesses to a truth Mercy Bend had taken too long to face. Naomi stepped beside Elias, close enough that he could hear the leather bracelet shift in her palm. "This is not finished," she whispered. Elias watched Silas Voss sit trapped between law, shame, and the eyes of the town he had taught to look away. "No," Elias said, "but it has finally begun." The ride into Mercy Bend should have felt like an ending, but the West has a cruel way of saving its hardest truths for the road home. Sheriff Amos Creed led Silas Voss ahead at a slow walk, not bound, not shamed with noise, just watched by the same people who had once stepped aside for him in fear. His two hired men followed behind, quiet and pale, with their hats low and their hands empty. Nobody cheered. That would have been too easy. Mercy Bend was not celebrating justice yet. It was learning how heavy silence becomes when it can no longer pretend to be innocence. Elias stood near his gate while the crowd began to break apart in pieces. A few wagons turned back toward town. A few men lingered, wanting to speak but not knowing how. One woman who had once pulled her child away from Elias at the church steps looked at him now with tears bright in her eyes, then looked down before the words could come. Elias did not demand them. A man can live years without an apology and still not know what to do when one finally tries to find him. Naomi watched the town scatter, her face unreadable beneath the blue blanket. The Apache riders remained along the slope, spread wide in the morning light, their horses patient, their presence no longer a threat in the eyes of those willing to see clearly. They had not raised a hand. They had not needed to. They had stood where truth could be witnessed, and that had been enough to shake a whole town loose from the lies. It had slept inside. Elias bent and picked up the ranch for sale sign. The nail was still stuck through one corner. He looked at it for a long moment, then carried it to the chopping block beside the porch. With one clean swing of the hammer, he knocked the nail free. The sign split at the seam and fell into two plain boards. Naomi came to stand a few feet away. "You could use those," she said. "For kindling?" Elias asked. "For repair." He almost smiled. Almost. The ranch looked different now. Not better, not fixed, just seen. The porch still leaned. The roof still needed patching. The well rope was frayed, and the south fence sagged in 3 places. Freedom did not mend wood by itself. It only gave a man the right to start. One of the Apache riders dismounted and walked to the broken gate hinge. Without a word, he lifted it, studied the bent iron, and nodded toward the tool shed. Another rider led 2 of Elias's horses to the trough and checked their hooves with quiet skill. A third carried water to the old bay that had cried out when Naomi first arrived. Elias watched them with confusion tightening his brow. "What are they doing?" Naomi looked toward the ranch house. "Standing beside you. I never asked for help." "No," she said. "You have made a religion of not asking." That one landed close enough to hurt. Elias turned away, but there was no anger in it. Only the discomfort of being understood. Across the yard, a small figure slipped through the gate. It was a boy from town, maybe 10 years old, holding a bundle of clean rags and a coil of rope too big for his arms. His mother stood at the road, nervous, but she did not call him back. The boy stopped in front of Elias, swallowed hard, and held out the rope. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. "Pa says your well line looked near broke." Elias stared at him. The boy's hands trembled, but he did not lower them. Then another man came from the road with a sack of nails. Then the blacksmith's wife with 2 loaves wrapped in cloth. Then old Mr. Hamley from the feed store, walking slower than shame, carrying a ledger under one arm. "Found some mistakes in my books," Hamley muttered. "Long overdue fixing." Mercy Bend did not flood back all at once. It came like hesitant rain on dry ground, drop by drop, apology by apology, each one too small to erase the past, but large enough to begin troubling it. Naomi stood beside Elias as the yard filled with people who had once left him alone. Nobody spoke of forgiveness. Not yet. That word was too clean for a morning still covered in dust. Instead, they worked. White hands and Apache hands lifted the same boards, carried the same water, tightened the same fence wire under the same hard sun. Sheriff Creed returned near noon, without Silas. He stopped at the gate and removed his hat. "Voss will answer before the circuit judge," he said. Elias nodded once. Creed looked at Naomi. "And Miss Redfeather, your documents will be entered proper." Naomi's eyes stayed steady. They already were. Creed accepted the cut without protest. Then he looked at Elias. "I was wrong." The yard went quiet around those 3 words. Elias held them carefully, as if they might break if handled too fast. "Yes," he said. Creed lowered his eyes. "I aim to do better." Elias looked toward the repaired fence, toward the boy tying the well rope, toward Naomi with the old bracelet looped around her fingers. "Then start today," he said. By sunset, the ranch no longer looked abandoned. Smoke rose from the chimney. Horses fed at the rail. The south fence stood straight for the first time in years. But when the last nail was driven and the last wagon rolled toward town, Naomi remained by the cottonwood near the creek path, watching the western sky turn the color of copper. Elias walked to her slowly. Between them hung the question nobody else had touched since morning. Marriage, promise, debt, choice. Naomi held out the bracelet, and her voice was softer than the wind through dry grass. "Now, Elias Whitaker, before witnesses and without fear, tell me whether you see a debt standing here, or a woman." Elias looked at the bracelet in Naomi Redfeather's hand, and for a long while, the whole ranch seemed to wait with him. The cottonwood leaves moved overhead, silver on one side, green on the other, whispering in the cooling wind like old voices that had finally grown tired of secrets. Across the yard, the last townspeople stood near their wagons, pretending to check harness straps and wheel pins, but nobody truly left. The Apache riders waited beyond the fence line, calm beneath the red evening sky. Sheriff Creed stood hat in hand beside the road. Even the old bay horse by the trough had gone still. Naomi did not press him. That was the mercy of her. She had crossed years, grief, dust, and two people's suspicion to stand before him, and still she left him room enough to choose. Elias had known women in passing, known loneliness longer, known the way a man can fill a house with work and still hear the emptiness after supper. But this was not loneliness speaking. He would not let it be. He stepped closer, slow, until the bracelet rested between them like a small bridge over 17 years. "I see the child I carried through rain," he said. Naomi's face did not fall, but something in her eyes braced for hurt. Elias continued, his voice rough, honest, and low. "And I see the woman who rode back when everyone else forgot my name." The wind moved through the grass. Naomi breathed once, deep enough that the blue blanket shifted on her shoulders. Elias reached out, not for the bracelet first, but for her hand beneath it. He did not close his fingers until she let him. "I will not marry a debt," he said. "I will not marry gratitude. I will not let this town say you paid for kindness with your life." A shadow of pain crossed her mouth. Then he held her hand a little steadier. "But if you are asking whether I would share my road with Naomi Redfeather, not Little Rain from the Storm, not Taz's daughter, not the woman who saved my land, but you, then my answer is yes." For the first time that day, Naomi smiled. Not wide, not like a girl in a storybook, like a woman who had carried a heavy bundle to the end of a long trail and found the fire still burning. She untied the bracelet from her wrist and placed it in his palm. "Then keep this no longer as proof," she said. "Keep it as memory." Elias closed his hand around the cracked turquoise bead. Behind them, someone in the crowd let out a breath that sounded almost like prayer. The wedding did not happen that evening. That would have made it too simple, and nothing true in the West ever came clean of dust. It happened 3 days later beside Blackwater Creek, where the water had run high 17 years before. No church bell rang. No rifle cracked. No grand speech tried to smooth the rough edges of what people had done and failed to do. Naomi's people stood on one bank. Mercy Bend stood on the other. Between them, Elias and Naomi faced each other beneath a sky so wide it made every old hatred look small. Sheriff Creed read the civil words from a paper, slowly, carefully, as if each sentence were a board he hoped to set straight. When he finished, the old Apache rider with silver in his braids stepped forward and tied the deer-hide bracelet around both their joined hands, loose enough that either could pull away, strong enough that neither did. That was the part Mercy Bend remembered. Not a kiss, not a cheer. The knot. A promise made without ownership. A bond that did not erase difference, but honored the courage it took to stand across it. Silas Voss left town before the circuit judge arrived. Some said he went east. Some said he went south. Elias never asked. A man who has been given back his name does not need to chase the one who tried to steal it. The ranch changed slowly after that. A new roof before winter. A stronger well rope. Apache horses sometimes grazing near white cattle. Town children learning that the ridge was not a line to fear, but a place where the sun rose first. And on certain evenings, when the wind came down from the hills and touched the cottonwood leaves just right, Elias would sit beside Naomi on the porch and turn the cracked turquoise bead between his fingers. He had once thought justice would arrive loud enough for every man to hear. He had been wrong. Sometimes justice comes quietly. Sometimes it waits 17 years. Sometimes it rides back wearing a blue blanket, carrying an old bracelet, and asks one simple question that makes a whole town